Hi everyone, my name's Luke. I'm from Multi-Hire Power Tools and Smart Floor UK. Between the two companies, we've got everything that you'll need to polish concrete. So we hire machines, we sell machines, we've got overlays that are polishable, all the chemicals and all the tooling. What we thought we'd do is do a little how-to video on how to polish concrete. Now, every floor is different, so if you're needing a tailored quote or any information, get in touch with us and we'll be more than happy to help. Now, on this floor, this is just the Peterborough office. It's kind of been ground a few times before, so the effect when it finishes is completely different in areas. So in some areas, you've got the salt and pepper finish. In some areas, you've got high exposure of aggregate. Now, if you just want in a salt and pepper finish, then I'd start at 100 grit and probably do 1 to 2 passes depending on the concrete, but you'd have to gauge that whilst you're doing it. For a high aggregate exposure, you probably start at 25 grit and probably do another couple of passes to what we did. So I think that's everything. Let's get into the video. Depending on what finish you're after is where it depends on where you're going to start this video. For a cream finish, which keeps the top layer intact, showing minimal or no aggregate, just the natural paste of the concrete, then you're probably going to want to start the densification stage. But if there's any imperfections or anything that you need to grind out, then you'll have to move back to the 100 grit stage. For the salt and pepper finish, this is light grinding exposure to expose the sand and the fine aggregate so that it looks like salt and pepper. Then you're probably going to be able to start at the 100 grit, but if there's any imperfections, you might have to move back to the 50 grit. You've just got to be very careful not to expose the heavy aggregate. And then for the full aggregate exposure, this is the deep grind. You're wanting to get the grind so that all the exposure of the aggregate is where you want it to be before you move on to the next stage. This is normally done at a 25 grit. If the floor's particularly soft, you can get away with starting at the 50. So the machines that we use in this video were the Husqvarna PG6XR. Husqvarna are the market leaders when talking about concrete polishing machines. They are unbeaten. It was paired up with a Nilfisk S3LP with HEPA filtration. The tooling that we used, we started off with a 25 grit and then moved up to the 50 grit Husqvarna Elite Metals, and then we used the 100 grit Boride ceramic transitionals, and then for the polishing stages we used the 200, the 400 and the 800 grit Husqvarna Elite Polish Resin Pads. The chemicals we used were the Crete Colours Hard Blend Densifier. The grout coat was the Metzger McGuire SRG. Now that is our favourite grout, but it will darken the floor. So if you want a true representation of the concrete, then I'd look at maybe Pinfix or GM3000. And then we sealed it with the Ultra Seal. When using the sealer, you'll notice that we used the Nilfisk BU500 burnisher and then we used a Boride dip pad. We used 8000, but for this process, anything above 1500 is sufficient for the floors. So once you've finished in one direction, say north to south, you're going to go in the opposite direction, east to west. This is to make sure that all the floor is being covered and the same scratch pattern is throughout. So once you're happy that the floor is flat and you've got the right aggregate exposure for the floor that you want, you're going to have to vac all the dust off the surface. Now you have to vac it between every stage, so when you change the tooling, make sure you vac all that dust up because that will damage the floor as you're going up your stages. This is where you'd start for a power float with cream finish. Here we are using hard blend. We are tipping it out the bottle, which you should really sprayable because it was a small area, and we're spreading it out with a microfiber mop. So we've swapped the tool holders and we've put the Husqvarna Elite Polish 200 grit pads on. So you can do the same movements as before, slightly quicker as you can see, and a higher walking speed. So this is roughly what the 200 grit would look like. This is where you'd stop if you wanted a matte finish and use something like an SR2 sealer. Now we've fitted the 400 grit Elite Polish pads from Husqvarna. This will give you sort of a satin and low gloss finish. This is where you'll stop and use SR2 sealer again if that's the finish you're after. Now we're fitting the 800 grit Elite Polish pads from Husqvarna. So this is the 800 grit finish. This is going to give you sort of a mid to high gloss. If you're wanting to go higher, then you can go to 1500 in these pads. So we started applying the sealer. First off, you go over with the Nilfisk burnisher and a dip pad. We use the 8000 grit here, but it doesn't really matter as long as it's over 1500 grit. Now we applied the Ultra Seal, spraying and mopping, and it's a 2-coat system. So you burnish in between, and then here is the final burnish after the 2 coats have been applied. So you can see the trail there where the burnish has been, and you can see there the difference between when it's burnished and when it's not. And then coming up you'll have the final effect of the floor. So that's it finished, and then you can see the reflection. Thanks for watching our How to Polish Concrete video. Hopefully that's answered any questions that you had, but if not, please get in touch. We're going to have some more videos coming up in the future, like Densifier selection, sealer selection, and grout selection. All of them have different properties and qualities for different applications. So if you've got a project coming up, please get in touch and we'll tailor a quote to exactly what you want, what you need in your specification. Thank you.